Okay. Boker Tov, Morai V'Rabotai, Bruchim Habayim. We are continuing on Shulchan Aruch, Orach Chaim, Siman Nun Hey, and we are going to discuss a very popular question of what is considered a minyan. So we spoke about 10 people, but can you have 10 people, half of them in this Bet Midrash over here, and half of them in the next room? They're in the same building after all. This became actually a very big question when COVID hit, and then the recuperation afterwards involved a lot of minyanim, that half of them were indoors, half of them was outdoors, and people felt different levels of comfort with being with the mask indoors, with the mask outdoors, and so on. And all of a sudden you had this question of when can you count people part of the minyan? Or many times when you have a Sheva Brachot or Lavdil La'alenu Shiv'ah house minyan, and you want to know if you could count people who half of them are in the hallway, half of them are in the actual room, and so on and so forth. Behind mechitza is another question, really. If is that a mechitza that makes a separate reshut for itself? Can somebody stand behind the mechitza and daven and so on? That's of course also part of this question. So Maran writes in Shulchan Aruch, Sarich sheyu kol ha'asara b'makom echad. All of the minyan has to be in the same place. This is not a chidush of Maran. This is really a Gemara in Pesachim daf Ayin Hey Amud Bet. Says that the minyan has to be in one place. The question really is, what is considered one place? What is considered one place? Kol ha'asara b'makom echad u'shliach tzibur imahem. Shliach tzibur also has to be in the same place. He can't be in a different place. And says Maran, v'ha'omed betoch ha'petach, if somebody is standing within the doorway, it's not actually in the room, but he is inside the cavity of the doorway, min ha'agaf v'lachutz, if he is from the hinge of the door and outward, dehainu k'shesoger hadelet mimakom safa pnimit, shel ovi hadelet v'lachutz kelachutz. If where the door closes basically on the hinges, from there and outside is considered outside of the room. The Chafetz Chaim writes, Kol ha'asara v'afilun enan ro'im elu et elu. Even if they cannot see each other, but they're in the same room, that still is considered a bayit ehad. Still considered that they're in the same place, and that counts as a minyan. In other words, they don't have to see each other in order to be considered part of the minyan, given that they're in the same room. Now, you'll see that this makes a difference. Seeing one another could make a difference when you have other scenarios of not being exactly in the same place. Now, what if you're doing a outdoor minyan, a camp minyan, or a COVID minyan, so to speak? So it's not a room. There is no room. You're outdoors. What is the criteria for them to be? Can they be like half a mile apart from each other as soon as they see each other? What is exactly the criteria? And that Rabbi Mordechai Eliyahu alav shalom, he wrote that they could be considered part of the minyan so long as there's no public road in between them and they see each other. You know, you had the Bet Knesset of Alexandria. I'm not sure if that was outdoors or indoors, but it was so big that people could not hear possibly what the Shliach Tzibur was saying. They had they had flags that they would wave for people to know that Shliach Tzibur just said Amen, and people should answer. They knew where he's holding, which bracha they're answering Amen on, but they couldn't hear anything. So they had people who waved flags, and people would answer Amen, they would answer Kedusha and Kaddish, and so on and so forth. So I'm not sure if that was indoors or outdoors, but Rabbi Mordechai Eliyahu writes that if you have an outdoor minyan, if it's in a way that no public path breaks the minyan, the sides of the thing are all considered part of the same minyan. Says the Chafetz Chaim, אבל אם מקצתן בחדר זה ומקצתן בחדר אחר, but if they are in two different rooms, אינם מצטרפים If half of them are in this room, half of them are in the Bet Midrash next door, and both doors of the Bet Midrash are open, still they're not considered a minyan, even though that they're in the same basic room, but they're not considered part and parcel of the same minyan because they're in two different reshuyot. Says the Mishna Berurah, mishum de en sham pirza, because the rooms are not broken into each other. We're gonna know very soon what are the criteria of being broken into each other, being open enough that's considered halachically one room, even though that's really two rooms. They could be wide open to each other in a way that will be considered the same room. We're going to see that. And even the door itself, even though that you have a doorpost and a doorway, that frame by itself is considered like a mechitza. It will be two halachic houses, two halachic rooms. Even if you have the modern rooms, that there is no delet between them. Now, this modern architecture makes a difference in many sugyot. For instance, according to Rambam, a doorway that doesn't have a door is patur from mezuzah. We don't paskin like the Rambam, but it becomes enough. It's enough of an important shita that we will be hoshesh for that lechumra. We will be considering the shita of Rambam when it comes to stringency. For instance, you want to get a new set of washers and dryers, right? And you have usually it's 27 inches, right? And that's the normal pathway of a doorway. So it won't go in the washer and dryer until you take off the door off the hinges. So you take the door off the hinges, you take your washer and dryer inside, and now you put back the mezuzah on. According to the Rambam, the moment that you took off the door off the hinges, that doorway, that opening became patur mi mezuzah. It's no longer hayab mezuzah. And now, when you put the door back on hinges, that doorway is becoming hayab mezuzah. But from the moment that it became hayab mezuzah, you never put on mezuzah on it. The mezuzah was there already. That's a psul called ta'aseh velo min ha'asui. Right? You have to put mezuzah on an already existing doorway. If I destroyed the doorway, imagine to yourself, if you want to understand this, I see a lot of eyebrows here raising. If you imagine that you ordered to the carpenter a door, a frame, a fancy, nice Persian-looking door from Palace of Achashverosh, it looks like, right? Go to this Persian house and you think you're going to the king's palace, right? So you order one of those fancy big doors, and you say, you know what, once you add it, craft a nice mezuzah cover for me. And you know what, once you add it, just make it on. Put the mezuzah in, fix it exactly on the top third, and send the door to my house. So the door comes with the mezuzah, and you put it on the door. Pasul or kasher? Absolutely pasul. It's worth nothing. Nothing. Even though you have the most kasher mezuzah on your door, is worth zero. Because ta'aseh v'lo min ha'asu, you cannot make the mezuzah out of something else door. You have to have a doorway, and then it's chayab mezuzah. Then putting the mezuzah on it counts. But here, you didn't put the mezuzah on a door that was chayab. The moment you took the door off hinges, the doorway became patur. And now that you make it chayav again, you never put the mezuzah on it again. So even though that I'm making this sound simple, it's not so simple. I'm just presenting one side. But that is the halacha. That the chatchila, in such a case, you take the mezuzah off, you put the mezuzah back on without bracha. But again, in our case, I went on a tangent for doorways that don't have a door. In our case, it doesn't make a difference. You have a door, you don't have a door. As long as you have a doorway and there's a wall that covers the most of the width of the rooms to each other, to one another, that is considered two different rooms, even if you don't have the actual door. And it would be pasul to have half the minyan here, half the minyan there, and you can't have a asara divided to the two places. Says the Mishna Berurah, if they're in two different domains and they don't see each other, and mistarfin, they do not add up to a minyan. V'yesh mahmirin afilu bero'in. And there are those who are mahmir even if they see each other. That means, look, not necessary to say that if you are in the Bet Midrash sitting in the middle, I don't see you. But even if you're sitting literally by the door and I can see some miktsatan at miktsatan, as we're going to see in the Shulchan Aruch, that some of the people in this minyan see some of the people in that minyan, they still would not be considered a minyan. Some of the poskim hold. Yes. Well, we'll get to that. Okay, this is built up to that. The Kaf HaChaim, by the way, paskins like this. The Kaf HaChaim is mahmir. Says if you're in two different reshuyot, if you're in two different rooms, even if you could see each other, you're not considered part of the same minyan. Right? So now it became worse a little bit. Because now even if you could see each other through the mechitza, whatever you want to call it, still is going to be a difficulty. Well, we have to discuss if this is considered a regular mechitza in the shul that you share the same ceiling and half the room is the same. You just have a mechitza vasara tvachim. You have a mechitza that is mavdelet reshut halachically, separates the reshuyot, which is minimum of 10 tvachim tall. Does that mean that now we're completely in two separate rooms in a way that the minyan is not considered a minyan? We're going to discuss. So it says, the Kaf HaChaim, by the way, holds that this is dat of Maran Shulchan Aruch. Kaf HaChaim says, Maran is stringent that even if you have sight of the other people in the other room, still doesn't count the same minyan. You cannot be in two different reshuyot, period. Can't be in two different domains, halachic domains, and that's the end of it. That's what Kaf HaChaim holds in Shitat Maran. That's a completely different question. The question you're asking now is, if you have a minyan in this room, you have 10 people. I happen to be in the next room. Can I answer Kaddish? Yeah, you could. Right? Chavadia says, that's a much bigger question. But Chavadia holds even with Lavyan, even with a live broadcast, you can answer Kaddish and Kedusha and all of those, which is a much bigger question. We have never touched really that topic yet. But the language of Kaf HaChaim over here seems like that if you have if push comes to shove, if you have your back against the wall, it could be lenient like this poskim were lenient, but he holds that Maran Shulchan Aruch Lechatchila holds that you should be stringent in that manner. So it says the Chafetz Chaim. Echad, this that says in Sifkatan Memtet that Kol ha'asara b'makom echad v'shaliach tzibur imahem. Everyone has to be in one place. What's the definition of the all 10 being in one place? Hayu tish'a bebayit ve'echad b'sukkah. If you have 9 people in the house and one person is in the sukkah, right? The Chag HaSukkot, this happens. Yesh omrim de mistaref. There are those who say that this person could also be considered part of the minyan. V'yesh cholkin. Again, this is a earlier machloket between the Ma'arikash and Pri Megadim versus Pri Hadash. That Pri Hadash is Machmir. Rabbi Chizkiah di Silva, the Pri Hadash, he was a tremendous gaon. He grew up in Italy until he was 20. Then he came to Eretz Yisrael. He became the student of Maram Galanti, Rabbi Moshe Galanti, who was the direct student of Maran Shulchan Aruch. And Pri Hadash became a luminary of old-time gaon v'gadol, which is not the time to discuss it. He is Mahmir. Pri Megadim is Mekel. So Pri Hadash will tell you that even if one person is in the sukkah and 9 people in the house, because they're 2 different reshuyot, even if they're adjacent, you cannot be Mekel. Now this becomes very much Nogea, very much relevant to the outdoor minyanim, because what the sukkah is outdoors, outside the house, but you made it hot, you made a sukkah there. So this is exactly what people did in the time of, towards the end of the pandemic. So it says, the Mishna Berurah, this is machloket over here. There are those who are mahmir, and there are those who are mekel, כשיש 9 במקום אחד ואחד אחר הווילון שפורסים לצניעות, מסתרפים. Now, if you have 9 people on one side in the same room, and then you have a vilon, you have a curtain, which you put there for sniut, and then one of the people is behind the curtain, but it's in the same room. You just put a curtain there. Says the Mishna Berurah mistarfin, that's fine. You could add him up to the minyan. But dafka in parsul, it's sniut be'alma. That's only if the curtain is there for sniut only, right? For modesty. But says the Mishna Berurah, aval ikat filin or sefer Torah. But if you have tefillin or sefer Torah on one side, and you made a divider with your curtain in order to halachically make this side of the room not in presence of sefer Torah, not in presence of tefillin, which we discussed already before. It makes a difference for tashmish hamita and so on. If you did it, so that mechitza is mechitza hamateret. It's a mechitza that makes something mutar, something that otherwise would have been asur, now became mutar with this mechitza that you put there, and therefore haver nabi mechitza leseruf asara. That mechitza would also be considered a mechitza for the 2 parts of minyan, and you can't have 9 on one side and 1 behind the curtain. Velo mistarfi, and they would not be considered one unit. Uprimigadim mesaded the bechol gavni mistarfi. Primigadim says no, it doesn't make much of a difference. In any case, they still would be considered a minyan. And and the Kafachayim over here writes that the halacha is like pri hadash to be mahmir, right? Not to consider them as part of the minyan. Now, the mechitza in the shul is a very ambiguous concept, because technically speaking, it should be considered a mechitza hamateret. Rav Moshe Feinstein wrote a tshuva in the Ikrot Moshe's tshuvot in first volume in tshuva lametet, Siman lametet of Orachaim Cherek Aleph. He wrote a lengthy tshuva to go to prove from the Gemara. This is the Gemara in Masechet Sukkah Daf Nun Aleph, and he proves from the Gemara there that the mechitza in the shul is a biblical obligation. That means if you don't have mechitza in the shul, you're in transgression of a biblical item. The details of how he gets this it's actually not so complicated, but it is beyond the scope of this little talk, because this is of course a very interesting subject. If I start saying it, I have to explain it well, and that would take time. But he has a tshuva there, and a second tshuva 2 simanim later in Siman Mem Aleph in the same chelek about the mechitza of the shul. So technically speaking, yes, it should be considered mechitza amateret. The challenge to that, again, would make it a little bit more of a complex case, which I'm not going to do, but correct, based on the basic parameters of halacha. If you understand it like Rav Moshe Feinstein, or even those who disagree with him, still would be the Rabbanan, and therefore it's matir something. It should be considered. It should be considered the mechitza. There are those who seem to be a little more lenient, which again, the time for it would be for a shiur for itself. So says the Mishna Berurah, safa pnimit, if you have an inner ledge of the door, that the door closes on that side, the place that the door closes, imagine if you have a thick door, and the place that the door closes, that width, that cavity is considered like outside as well. Even though that now the door was open and the cavity is open, if that's the place that the door is going to be closed in, therefore it's considered outside. Magen Avraham disagrees with this concept. Magen Avraham holds that the place of the door is considered like inside, but the Kafachayim, again, he holds that Mara Shulchan Aruch over here holds it is outside, and therefore he sides with the mashma'ut of Maran, not like the Magen Avraham. Says the Mishna Berurah, ועיין בספר אבן העוזר, שפסק גם כן, בפשיטות דאיך דמיעוט עומדים תוך המקום הזה מצטרפים לעשרה. He also holds that if the minority of the 10 are standing in this place, they are considered part of the asara. After all, they're standing in the door, basically. They're kind of in the room, so he is making. Later on, we're going to discuss when you have two rooms and one of them is completely or mostly open to the other one, that it is considered a seruf. They will be considered as one part, and we're going to discuss that later. But he holds that standing in the door is no less than standing in that situation. Therefore, he would be mekel. But again, because you see because you see Kaf HaChaim rather and Maran Shulchan are stringent, always is good. If you're the 10th person, don't stand by the door. Come inside the shul to make a proper seruf, because perhaps Maran Shulchan is mahmir on that. So taking an extra step for humanity, small step for humanity, so to speak, that would be the right thing to do. So says the Mishna Berurah, Shel Obi Adelet, Ayin b'Yad Ephraim, Yad Ephraim writes, De behalal hapetach levad, ממקום הדלת, כגון היכא שהדלת קבוע לחוץ, וממקום הדלת ולפנים, יש עוד חלל בתוך עובי הפתח, לכולי עלמא הווה כלפנים. He holds that the area of the cavity of this, the width of the door, and sometimes it's a bigger area than just a regular opening of the door. He holds from that area that the door closes, and inside, it would be considered inside. In other words, now this door here is not like that. But imagine if the hinge of the door would be on the other side, and then you gain that cavity of the door. From the door and inwards would be considered part of the room inside, right? Because that again, even though that is the doorway, quote unquote, but it is considered inside the room. Al kol panim, halo belav hachi, harbe cholkin al Rabbeinu Yerucham. He says, anyways, you have others who disagree with it, and therefore he is willing to be a little bit more mekel. Now, the next Seif, we will start it, but we won't necessarily do the Mishna Berurah now. The next Seif talks about a person that is standing behind the Beit Knesset, but there is a window. Imagine if you're standing from the window, you're looking inside the shul. They could see you, you could see them, but you're not in the building even. You're outside. Everyone says, hi, you're there, mamash, you're seeing inside, and they could see you. Is that considered a seruf, or is that not considered a seruf? Says, you have no ceiling. You're outside the building of the Beit Knesset, but you're standing by the window, right? Says Marash Charuf, משעומד אחורי בית הכנסת ובניהם חלון, אפילו גבוה כמה קומות, אפילו אין לו רחב 4, ומראה להם פניו משם, מצטרף עמהם ל10. Even if you're not on the first floor, imagine there are two buildings next to each other, and you have a window between you and the shul. You're completely in a different building, and you're like, I'm here. You want us to, instead of waiting for me to go down the elevator and come up the elevator, just say the Kaddish right now. You're 9 people, and the guy is there. He sees you, you see them, and you show your face to them. There is this window. Maran says that person is considered part of the Asara. That's something that we have to now really discuss, because we just got finished saying that even if in the same building you have 2 different rooms, even if the guy standing behind the door, Kaf HaChaim understood that doubt of Maran is to be mahmir. So how are you explaining this then? That's something amazing, which Bezrat Hashem, we're going to have a cliffhanger for tomorrow.
Because you can see in here.